Hi there, how's it going? I've had two questions recently about solo training. The first was from one of our YouTube members, Ed, and he asked about ground movement and groundwork from a solo perspective. So that's something we're going to be putting up on our YouTube channel. We've still got one or two more films just going up that's finishing off our series on striking work, and then we're going to get into ground movement, solo training, and then working into groundwork with a partner too. So if you want to access those, just click the join button below, and that will give you all the details of how you can become a member and access all of our new instructional downloads and material. The second question was from young Alex in class, and he said he was at a gym just recently and he noticed a lot of people there were doing sort of fixed weight training, which he wasn't too keen on. But he asked the question, is it all right to use free weights in Systema training? And the answer is yes, in short. You can use pretty much anything you like in Systema as long as you approach it with the Systema principles in mind. Now obviously people go to gyms and go on fixed weight machines. Perhaps it's to build up their strength and fitness, though generally more often than not it's to sculpt the body in particular ways to develop a particular look. And of course the downside of that type of strength training, if we call it that, is we're just working in that fixed plane of motion. So from a Systema perspective it's quite limited, especially when you're working on a machine that really does strictly keep you within that limit. The minute you pick up a free weight, let's say you've got a kettlebell or something, the minute you pick that up, then you're working in all sorts of angles and all sorts of positions. So not only will your strength increase in terms of the muscle, you may not be sculpting the muscle as so much, though they will develop to some extent, but what you're also strengthening are the tendons and the ligaments and this idea of the connectivity of the body. Now a free weight can be anything. In conventional martial arts terms, weapons can be seen as weight training in some respect, especially if you're working a sword or a stick or a staff or that kind of implement, and even working with a normally weighted item will give you some sort of strength training. But the important thing is it's strength training with that idea of functionality. And personally I like to use a sledgehammer for this kind of work. That's my sort of go-to bit of kit, because the sledgehammer, I can map that directly onto my punching work. I'm getting work for the joints, I'm getting work for strength, I'm getting work on functional movement, but also I'm getting work on this connectivity, because there's different ways, as I've said on other downloads and other vlogs, there's different ways of moving the sledgehammer. I can move it with relaxation and wave movement, I can use internal support, I can sort of use power to try and move the object. So it gives me, even though there might be a limited set of movements I can do with the sledgehammer, there's 3 or 4 different ways of doing those movements. And then of course aside from that I can chain all these movements together. So in a way that some of the Asian arts use a kata, where you have a fixed sequence of movements, I can do the same with the hammer or the stick or the kettlebell and really develop my own routines. And in doing so I'm challenging myself not just to constantly work in these fixed planes of movement, but I can be working this way, that way, I can be changing level and going up, going down, I can be moving on the floor with the objects and so on. So yes, whatever you want to use, even just a normal stick, obviously you can get a lot of good mobility training with the stick, but if the stick is quite heavy then it's still a weight, especially if you start projecting it out further away from the body, then of course in effect you're increasing the weight of the stick. If you wanted to work the idea of free weights but keep that stick element involved, then you can always try something like a weight bar. You can do the same sort of movements, but obviously with the weight it's a different challenge, and of course again the further I bring this out from the body, or the further I bring the hand away from the middle, the weight increases exponentially again. But always I'm working through this prism of my breathing, my posture, maintaining correct levels of tension and relaxation, working internal support where I need it, moving through relaxation or moving through power, or even sometimes if I want to work on tension, then I can work perhaps static positions just to help build up that sort of tendon strength in different places as well. So there's a whole range of options available in terms of free weights. If you want advice on kettlebells, for example, there's a lot of information out there. The one thing I would say is kettlebells have become something of a fad, so do try and get as authentic instruction as you can, rather than looking at people who will show you 25 moves in one go. Look at some of the older stuff where they go through maybe 2 or 3 moves, but they talk a lot about the breathing and the posture and the kinetic chain and so on. That's where you get the real benefit. Again, when something becomes fashionable, people tend to gravitate to it, and then it all becomes about sculpting the body, losing weight, being fit, and people throw the term functional fitness around a fair bit, but to be honest, they don't always know what it really means. In terms of how you build that into your solo training, well, that's a wider question. We could ask how we structure our solo training, for example. It's a very good question, particularly if you're working on your own, you haven't got access to a class. You can maybe get access to download materials such as this channel, or people doing online classes such as Vladimir does on Saturdays. So there is that. I believe someone has even written a book or two about solo training. Could be useful to get those as well. But briefly, think about what your goals are. What do you want to achieve short term? Do you find you're lacking in mobility? So you want to increase your flexibility, you want to increase your range of motion, so then your solo training will be geared around joint rotation works, perhaps moving on the floor, doing some stretching and so on. Do you want to build up your core strength? So we've always got our basic exercises, of course, the push-ups, the sit-ups, the squats, and all the variations of those. To be honest, if you add those variations in, and with the variations in breathing as well, there's enough in there to keep you going for years. Then of course you can look, as we said, at this idea of free weights, using a stick, using a hammer, using a kettlebell, whatever it might be, using a sword, and there you're looking always to develop this functional movement. I like that sort of work because if I'm working on sort of rotations, for example, I'm getting the strength element, I'm getting the core strength element, I'm getting movement, I'm working the rotation of the joints and the articulation of the body in certain ways, I'm getting the connectivity going through. So for me, that kind of exercise is a time saver because I can get the benefit in all those areas in one exercise rather than having to do 4 different things. And that's very much what Systema is about as well. Your work is always integrated, and I'm always aware in class or when we present stuff online, for example, or in films, that we often break the work down into these small segments. Sometimes in terms of application, we slice it down into time segments, very specific points in any sort of incident, because incidents don't just occur like that. There's normally a sort of lead up or a preface to it. We have the incident, and then there's the afterwards part as well. So quite often in training we're looking at those little slices. Of course we need to join those together in some way. Or we might be looking, when we're doing our attribute work, we might be focusing on breathing, for example. We could be totally static and doing breath work. But of course, breathing goes into everything. So we only really separate things out for convenience and as an aid to teaching and learning. As much as you can outside of that, you're trying to integrate all these things together. So free weights is a good way to do that, especially if you're working on your own. Obviously, if you've got a partner, then they can act as a weight as well. You can work with your partner in different ways just to move their weight. They're almost just like a solid object. Or of course you can work with different levels of resistance. You can work sort of grappling drills. You can work slowly with tension against each other. There's so many different ways of working in that sense of using a partner as a free weight as well. So to the question, can you use free weights in Systema? Then the short answer is yes. There's the slightly longer answer as well. Yes, with those caveats. We could of course go into this in a huge amount of detail, which we will be doing on our member downloads. Click the join button to find out about those, and also in our upcoming workshops as well. When we do a whole day session, then of course that gives us the time to really dig a little deeper into some of these subjects. But for now, whatever you choose, pick it up, move it around, get comfortable with it, then start thinking about more challenging movements you can do with it. But always, always, always breathing, movement, posture, and monitoring your levels of tension. Take your time, keep it safe, keep it steady. That's the way you make progress. So if you have any questions or comments on that, please do let me know below, or send me an email at systemauk@outlook.com. In the meantime, please like, share and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.